Go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy to get 20% off your first month of cognitive behavioural therapy, with weekly sessions online with a therapist, in addition to worksheets, a journal, meditation and yoga videos, and unlimited messaging. There's strong evidence that CBT can help people who hoard, and accessing therapy online can be affordable and accessible. Find out more and get your discount at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy.
Normally, being a little extra can be a bit much, but when it comes to healthcare, it pays to be extra. And United Healthcare makes it easy with Health Protector Guard fixed indemnity insurance plans. Underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, they supplement your primary plan, helping you manage out-of-pocket costs without the usual requirements and restrictions like deductibles and enrollment periods. So when it comes to covering your medical bills, you can feel good about being a little extra. Visit uh1.com to find the Health Protector Guard plan for you.
With LinkedIn Jobs, we tap into a network of more than 1 billion professionals to help you find quality professionals quickly and easily for any role you need. Marketing wizards? Found them.
Software engineers?
Found. That project manager I could never seem to hire? And found. LinkedIn Jobs quickly matches your roles with candidates with the right skills and experience. In fact, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Post your first job for free and get started at linkedin.com/spoken. That's linkedin.com/spoken. Terms and conditions apply.
Think of all the sleep hacks you've ever heard. You could spend years trying them all, or you could instantly transform your sleep with Boll & Branch. They make the softest, most breathable bedding you'll ever feel. And it's all 20% off. That's their best sale of the entire season. Millions of sleepers love their buttery soft sheets, airy blankets, cloud-like duvets, and so much more. And you can try all of them for 20% off with promo code BUTTERY20. So hurry to bollandbranch.com today. That's BOLL and branch.com. See site for details.
Welcome to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder podcast. I am drowning in stuff and trying to find a way out. Listen as I explore the issues and delve deep as somebody profoundly affected by hoarding disorder. Find out more, including links to subscribe to the podcast and all my social media at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. So I'm starting with something very cool that is brand new to listeners this week. Listeners of this podcast are so supportive. You leave amazing reviews, you send donations, you share the podcast with your friends and family and colleagues, you send supportive messages, and I love you for it. It helps to keep me going when I'm running late with a transcript or sick of the sight of the audio editing program. I love doing this, but it is hard work. And sometimes you ask me what more you can do, and sometimes you want more from me. Well, now there's a way that both of those things can be achieved. You can become a de-hoarding darling. Firstly, and most importantly, the podcast is free and will continue to be free. Nothing is changing about that, nothing at all. But if you do want extra in the form of a monthly written update that includes an extra top tip, 2 podcast episode recommendations. One is about hoarding, organising or mental health, and the other is unrelated but interesting or enjoyable. And a music recommendation of a song that's either boppy enough to help you de-hoard or meaningful enough to soothe your mind a bit, as well as a summary of how things are for me. You can now get it. People who become de-hoarding darlings will get this exclusive monthly treat. And if you want to sign up or find out more, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. It will help to ensure the future of the podcast. It will help me with the costs it incurs, and it will give you a warm, fuzzy feeling because you'll know you're helping. The podcast will continue as it is, but if you want a bit more, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. compulsive hoarding.co.uk/darling. So today I want to talk about money and hoarding because I was thinking about it, and it seems to me that there are two potential extremes where money and hoarding are concerned. One is that a hoarder can shop compulsively, spend a lot of money, get into debt because of buying so many things, and get into real financial trouble because of their hoarding. But the other extreme is people who hoard money. And I'm not talking particularly about the billionaires, although obviously they hoard money. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about everyday people who, you hear about it, don't you? Somebody dies and then it turns out they had millions of pounds in the bank. And often they lived a really frugal life. They wanted to save money the whole time. And yet, unbeknownst to everybody, they had a lot of money in the bank. Often refusing to spend even when they really, really needed to. So I think hoarding is kind of a disorder of extremes, I think. And this parallel situation between running out of money because you hoard or having way too much money in the bank because you hoard is an interesting kind of contradiction to look at. So that is what I'm talking about today. In certainly Western societies, there are a lot of really contradictory messages about money. I think about the way we are meant to aspire to be rich. We are meant to look at people on Instagram who have a lot of money and think, I wish I was like that. And yet at the same time, we are taught that money is the root of all evil. We are taught that rich people are greedy, they're corrupt, and yet also that money will provide security and comfort. It's demonized and worshipped at the same time. And that's a confusing environment to grow up in. And I think it's no wonder that many of us have complex thoughts and feelings about money. So first of all, I'm going to talk about how hoarding and being a hoarder can be bad for your finances, actually destructive, financially destructive. Okay, the most obvious example is we might buy things we don't need. That is very common. Acquiring is part of this disorder for a lot of people. That's the most obvious way. But there are actually, when you start thinking about it, there are lots of ways that hoarding can cost extra money. So if you're like me and struggle to open your post, open your mail, you might not open a bill in time and end up having to pay a late fee. Or you might not open a parking fine, so you can't pay it in the first 30 days to get a discount. Or you might open your mail but just lose the bill and not be able to pay it. And similarly, you might receive a check, you might receive some cash, you might have some cash and you put it somewhere and never see it again. So rather than paying it into your bank or rather than being able to spend the cash, it disappears, and that has cost you money as well. Another thing that is really common for hoarders is rebuying things we've already bought once. And this can obviously get expensive. So it might be that you bought a perfectly good folder for your paperwork, but it was in a pile for 6 months and then in another pile for 6 years. And by the time you refound it, it's absolutely damaged and unusable. Similarly, we might rebuy things because we've lost them. We know we have one somewhere. We know we have a particular book. We know we have a tin opener. We know we have a makeup bag, But if we don't know where it is and we really need it, or we feel we really need it, we rebuy another one. If, like me, you have had trouble organizing your food or organizing your kitchen, you might rebuy things you've already got, but also you might kind of give up and just order takeaway or order drive-through or go and pick up a takeaway. There's nothing wrong with doing that when you fancy a takeaway or as a treat, but if that's your daily situation because you can't get to the stove or because you just don't know where in that jam-packed cupboard there is something edible, that really adds up. Takeaways are delicious, but also, quite a lot more expensive than cooking. Some people pay for storage as well. They rent a storage unit, pay monthly to store sometimes really worthless items, certainly things that aren't worth the amount you're paying for storage. Some people even, what's the opposite of downsize? Upsize, I guess. Get a bigger house or a bigger flat just to contain the amount of things they own. Whether that's renting or buying a bigger home, that adds up. There's nothing wrong with upsizing, but if you're doing it just to contain an unreasonable amount of stuff, that's something that's worth looking at rather than just doing it straight away. And some people who live in a hoarded home hate being in that home and so spend a lot of time out of the house. And whether they go to cafes for a change of scene or whether they go shopping for a change of scene, that all costs money. You might end up spending more doing just avoidant activities to stay out of your house. And then on top of all of that, if you're spending more than you've got, so you're spending on a credit card or you get a loan, there is interest to add on to what you're paying for the stuff. And especially even if you're not spending beyond your means, if you're always just about okay financially, and then you have some kind of crisis that you can't avoid having to pay out for, that might be when you end up having to get a loan or a card with terrible interest rates just because you can't get to work without the car and the car needs fixing, or because the front door's broken and you need a front door on your house. So there are lots of ways that being a hoarder, probably more than I've thought of, but that was what I could think of. And it creates financial difficulties. If any or all of those apply to you, and it certainly made me think, I'm not broke. I think partly because the things I'm most hooked on buying are bargains. But that's not to say I don't waste money, because I do, purely on the acquiring side of this thing. Even if something's cheap, if you don't need it, you're still spending, aren't you? Even if you're spending less than if it was full price. Now, often we might kid ourselves, and that is what it is. It's kidding ourselves by saying, oh yeah, but having the stuff is like equivalent to having the money. I've got it, so it's the same. And unfortunately, that is just not the case. There are certain things that you can resell for some or most of what you originally paid for it. I was talking to a friend with a new baby, and she was saying that baby stuff, she buys it on Facebook Marketplace, and then when the baby's grown out of it, which they do very quickly, she resells it on Facebook Marketplace and gets most of what she spent. So there are some things like that that do hold some value. But a lot of what we hope or wish would hold value actually doesn't particularly well. Just because we value something doesn't mean the outside world values it as well. Plus, there's the added factor of what if we do have a really, like a designer suit that cost a lot of money in the first place? And what if we think, yeah, but it's Ralph Lauren, or I don't know anything about clothes designers. So let's go with Ralph Lauren. If that's not cool, substitute something that is cool. So we might say, yeah, but it's Ralph Lauren. Obviously that will sell for loads. But these things, there's two problems with this. One is that if it's a designer thing that nobody likes, you might sell it to a collector, but it's not going to have widespread appeal. If it's a designer thing that was perfect in 2002, but now just looks really dated, it's still, you're not going to get much for it. But the other thing is that it might be perfect. It might still be really stylish. It might be really in demand. But if it's been in a box in your cellar for 15 years and it smells of mildew and its moths have got to it, then that's worth nothing. I think we like to think that this stuff has value because we need to justify to ourselves living in this way, but we need to be a bit honest with ourselves that most of our stuff does not have monetary, financial value. And however much we tell ourselves it's an investment, we're going to sell it, you're going to make loads of money, my kids can sell it, and they'll be rich, it's just unlikely to be the case. And my friend who's buying and selling baby stuff, that is stuff that costs £5, not stuff that costs £500. She's not getting rich from this. She's just clothing her baby and getting toys for her baby without paying shop prices and then getting 3/4 of that back when the baby's outgrown it in 2 months. AKA, this is not an excuse to go out and buy a load of baby stuff as an investment. Doesn't work like that, I'm afraid. So these are habits, even if we don't have a major, say, acquiring problem or a major problem with losing bills and paying them late. They are habits that build up over time. And the thing with financial problems is they do often start small and get bigger. Even spending a few pounds, a few dollars more than you've got a week. Over a year, that's a lot of pounds or a lot of dollars that you don't have. Your bank will empty out and then your credit card will hit its limit. And what will you do? Because you probably won't have stuff that you can sell for any amount of money. And even if you do, you're going to hate the thought of getting rid of it, let's face it. So it spirals, and the stress associated with financial problems is immense. I've been through this. It was horrific, and it echoed for years because I had debt that it took me a really long time to pay off. It is a very scary place to be, and it's not a minor thing to go through. At worst, it can cost you your home. It can cost you your family. It can cost you your job. It can be absolutely disastrous. But even if it's not full on disaster, the day-to-day stress. See, this is, if you've listened for any amount of time, that I have trouble opening my post. What I probably haven't made as clear is that a big part of that is because when I was in all that debt, I got threatening letters daily in the post. And it was that that just made opening the post a scary, intimidating, horrible thing to have to do. It was that was a big part of why I still, years later, am scared to open the post. This stuff echoes. It's horrible. The self-storage thing, Americans spend, just have a think about how much Americans might spend on self-storage units every year. Just pick a number, because It is astoundingly $38 billion. That's billion with a B every year on self-storage. And I bet that 80%, 90% of that is storing stuff that doesn't need to be kept. It's storing basically delayed decisions. You think, oh, well, I'll stick it in the self-storage now and sort it later. And you don't, because then it's out of sight, out of mind, isn't it? It's gone. If you've got self-storage, it's an ongoing expense, and it's worth looking at. If that is part of your monthly budget, what could you do with that money if you could just empty the storage unit? There's a logical fallacy called the sunk cost fallacy. And that is that when you've already invested something, you're a lot more hesitant to give it up. So say you've been waiting for a bus for 30 minutes. Logic says the bus isn't coming. This is ridiculous. Half an hour at the bus stop. I can't cope. This is ridiculous. But the sunk cost fallacy tells you, yeah, but you've waited this long. You may as well give it a bit longer. And similarly, if you have paid for some stuff, that is a sunk cost. You've spent the money, it's gone. But having spent that money affects what you then feel you should do with that thing. You've invested the money, so you feel more like you should hold on to it. It's like it's a way of proving to yourself that you haven't wasted your time, just like it's a way of proving to yourself that you haven't wasted 30 minutes at the bus stop. If you can justify, just another 10 minutes wait. I'll just get the self-storage unit for another month because I've already paid out for 6 months, and if I just cleared it out now, that will have been a waste of that whole 6 months. There is a phrase, throwing good money after bad, and that really comes to mind. And those contradictory messages we get about money, about having money, we also get about spending money. I know that whenever there's somebody in the newspaper who is complaining about something, maybe their landlord isn't repairing their house or something like that, and there's a photo and this person happens to have a mobile phone or happens to have a TV, there will always be somebody in the comments saying, well, they can afford a TV. They shouldn't spend their money if they can't afford to get the house fixed, for instance. And it's really judgmental. Like, I often see complaints about, well, he says he was homeless, but he had a phone. And the thing is, you can't get through life without a mobile phone. You just can't. It's very, very difficult. And in this country, if you want to get certain, like, social security benefits, you need a phone. You have to do it over the phone. And phone boxes that used to be emblematic of Britain, you can hardly ever find them now. It's very difficult to find a phone box. So what are people meant to do? And yet, if somebody sees a homeless person on their phone, they go, well, how dare they spend money on that? And so we're judged for spending money. And then we're judged for not spending money. I remember really vividly after 9/11, George W. Bush told Americans that the responsible, patriotic thing to do was to spend money, go shopping, invest in the economy. Similarly, apparently through COVID, 1 in 3 people in the UK increased their savings during the pandemic. And Rishi Sunak, who is our latest Prime Minister, we've had a few in the last few months, has similarly said of people who have saved money over COVID, you should spend it, invest in the economy, spend your money. And yet if you spend all your money and then need to claim benefits, you will be criticised for having spent your money. You can't win. You can't win. The messages are so confusing. And so it all makes sense to me. I fully understand how hoarding can leave people short of money. I fully get that. It seems really logical to me. And although my period of poverty was not related to overspending, wasn't related to hoarding, except in that it turned what I was already kind of unusually messy, I will say, but the period of poverty absolutely turned that into full-on hoarding. But the period of poverty wasn't caused by anything hoarding related. And so I was also intrigued about the other side of things, how hoarding money is a thing. And at first I thought, well, surely that would be a good thing. How can anyone think that saving too much money is detrimental? I couldn't understand at all. So, gosh, have I read a lot. And it actually started to make sense to me. So, money hoarding essentially takes a positive behavior, which is saving money, investing in your future, to an unhealthy extreme. And it is characterized in particular by massive risk aversion, right? Now, this is something I can relate to and has come up before when talking about other aspects of hoarding. So hoarders can amass money. We can gather and gather and gather and save and save and save because of the same reasons we hoard anything. It might be because we want to feel secure. It might be because we want to be independent. It might be because we can't get past the feeling that we don't have enough and will never have enough and it's impossible to have enough. And also, this risk aversion thing comes in here because if you have lots of money, not a problem I have, how to explain? Okay, I have some savings. I work quite hard to save. I would ultimately like to buy a house and the deposit you need to pay gets bigger faster than I can save, but I'm really working on it, right? And so I am putting money in a savings account every month. And if you have a lot of money, people say, well, savings accounts are okay, but the interest rates you get are pretty terrible and often don't keep up with inflation. So if you only put things in a savings account, or worse, you just store it all under your mattress, then you're actually losing money over time because the savings interest rates don't keep up with inflation, which is how much things cost. And so it's often recommended that you should invest in one way or another. Now, investing is not for the risk averse. I am very risk averse. I'm also not rich enough. I don't understand investing at all, I should say. But I feel like that's something you do when you're richer than I am. But if you are richer than I am, then holding on to that security is, if you need to avoid all even hints at risk, mean that you won't put your money in anything other than an easy access savings account. From what I read, it sounds like you're kind of losing out as a result. But also, I periodically review savings accounts options because, often they have a really good interest rate for the first 12 months and then it drops to virtually nothing. So I sometimes review my savings account and try and find a better one. And you can always get more interest if you put your money in an account that you can't withdraw from for a certain amount of time. So it might be at the least a 3-month saver, which has slightly better interest rates than an easy access account. Or you can put your money away for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, and it will come out at the other end with much more interest than an easy access account. And yet I always go for the easy access account. Always, always, always. And it is absolutely that hoarding fear of what if I need it. Even if, again, thinking of a deposit for a house, that's not going to happen in the next 3 months. So I could safely put it in a 3-month savings account or a 6-month one, but I don't, because the thought of not being able to access it gives me the fear. So I looked into what the difference is between saving money and hoarding money. And saving money, there is a goal or a purpose in mind when you save money. So that might be you're saving to buy a car, or you're saving for a deposit on a house, or you're saving for a new kitchen, or you're saving for your kids to go to university. Whereas hoarding money, the goal is just to keep the numbers going up, just to keep accumulating. There isn't anything beyond, I want that number to get higher as a motivation, really. There are all the fears that we've talked about. What if I need it? What if this happens? But that's not the same as having a goal or a real purpose for it. Because the thing is, and this is where I started to understand why hoarding money is a problem. People who engage in hoarding money like this, they just want to accumulate, will often not buy even necessities in order to keep the number in their savings account going up and up and up. So they might not buy food, because if they spend £20 on food, that's £20 that doesn't go into the savings account. They might not buy insurance for their home, even though, that's a big risk, especially in a hoarded home. And that's why I started to understand that it is negative. And that's why it's different to your Jeff Bezos and your Elon Musk and your billionaires, because they are hoarding money in that they are holding on to it when it could be doing a lot of good. But they are not hoarding money in this sense, where they are then refusing to even buy themselves clothes when they need them. The very, very super rich people are people who have a lot, and it may well be immoral to have that much money when people are starving to death. However, they are not doing it at their own expense. They may be doing it at other people's expense. That is not a discussion for this podcast. But they're not holding out, and they're also not risk averse. These are people who take risks with their money, and that's partly how they got so much. Whereas true money hoarders, people who are hoarding money in a more clinical, problematic sense, might not turn the heating on for the whole winter, not because they can't afford it, because they can, but because they don't want to spend anything. We've all heard of people who survived the Second World War, for instance, or the Great Depression, and I know more about survivors of the Second World War, people who lived through it in the UK, who lived through rationing, and who lived through a time where you had to make a lot of food in particular out of very little. So people were encouraged to dig up their gardens and plant their own food, and then everything else was rationed, and you could sometimes get things and you sometimes couldn't. And these were people, especially the housewives of the time, who had to learn to not waste a single piece of potato peel or a single used tea bag. Everything had to be reused. Everything had to be used so carefully. And they wouldn't dream of letting an apple go mouldy or a banana go brown, because everything was so scarce and so valuable. And a lot of those people struggled when rationing eventually stopped. Understandably struggled to let go of those habits. And it's really, there's a lot of value in frugality, but for some people that went further than is probably healthy. And even when they had money and there was food in the shops, they couldn't stop living in deprivation, basically. So they might stockpile food, they might stockpile scrap metal, but it's no longer about survival. It's about something that's been drilled in so much that we can't shake it off. And some of those people will have become hoarders. Some won't have fitted the clinical definition, but I think there is a spectrum, and we might be on one end of it and they might be just part way through. And then, of course, we learn from our parents, whether they're hoarders or not. So my grandparents lived through the Second World War, and that generation's deprivation and struggles will no doubt have had an impact on how that generation brought up their children, which for me would be my parents' generation. And my parents were not hoarders, but they kept everything. They just always had a very, very tidy house. But even taking my particular family out of it, just looking at it generationally, you can see how generational trauma and generational hoarding can happen. If your grandparents had to live on virtually nothing, then they taught those values to their children, which is my generation's parents. And if my generation's parents had had that drilled into them their whole lives, they will teach that to us. And if you are susceptible to hoarding, it becomes more of a problem. We learn things, we internalize things, and periods like my period when I had no income just exacerbate all of this messaging.
A lot can happen in the next 3 years. Like a chatbot may be your new best friend. But what won't change? Needing health insurance. United Healthcare Tri-Term Medical Plans are available for these changing times. Underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, they offer budget-friendly, flexible coverage for people who are in between jobs or missed open enrollment. The plans last nearly 3 years in some states, with access to a nationwide network of doctors and hospitals. So for whatever tomorrow brings, United Healthcare Tri-Term Medical Plans may be for you. Learn more at uh1.com.
With LinkedIn Jobs, we tap into a network of more than 1 billion professionals to help you find quality professionals quickly and easily for any role you need. Marketing wizards? Found them.
Software engineers?
Found.
That project manager I could never seem to hire?
And found. LinkedIn Jobs quickly matches your roles with candidates with the right skills and experience. In fact, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Post your first job for free and get started at linkedin.com/spoken. That's linkedin.com/spoken. Terms and conditions apply.
I'm going to link to a research study in the show notes. It's quite long, but actually fascinating. And something that it talks about in there is that significant financial losses or periods of economic turmoil are known to lead to higher rates of post-traumatic stress. And as well as that, to changes in our beliefs about money and changes in our approaches to investing. And that is really interesting because way back, I think it was the first episode I interviewed Dr. Jan Eppingstall, we talked about trauma and hoarding, and she confirmed what I had suspected, which is that trauma is massively present in a lot of hoarders. It's a huge, not predictor of hoarding, because obviously there are far more people who experience trauma who don't become hoarders than those who do. But it's almost like a prerequisite to hoarding. It has to be there to some degree. It's very unusual for it not to be there. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And so there hasn't been a load of research into money hoarding. But what does exist does suggest that for some people with hoarding disorder, being very frugal to the point of being miserly is a significant feature, and that it's this anxiety about not having enough that means we can neglect our needs. Someone who is dying of cancer in a country where you have to pay for your healthcare and will choose not to get treatment because that would mean spending their money. That degree of extremity. There's fear of insecurity. There is fear of losing it. There's also not trusting that other people. Now, how familiar is this to our belongings? There is not trusting that other people will behave well with your money, or that other people will treat your money well. And there is research that shows that people who believe that your net worth predicts your self-worth, and that this is significant to your happiness, are significantly more likely to hoard all kinds of things, not just money. And we need to look carefully at the way we view money, because it's about learning to manage both saving and spending healthily. Now, this thing of trying to avoid the extremes and come to somewhere in the middle is a conversation I feel like we've had 20 times on this podcast in one way or another. And here it is again, just like we can't buy nothing and we can't buy everything. Similarly, we can't save everything and we also can't spend everything. We need to kind of learn to live in that middle ground. And that is difficult. It is difficult. If you have a good chunk of money in a savings account, it's worth considering having a conversation with a financial advisor or somebody who can advise you on how you can get the best out of that money. Because, as I said before, savings accounts may not be the best in that respect. They are great for short term. They are great for easy access. But if you have a lot of money and you're not going to run out of money, financial advisors can be really helpful in working out the level of risk that you are comfortable with and making suggestions based on that. If you don't even trust savings accounts and everything is in a big bag in the cellar and you just have tons and tons of banknotes, don't go as far as stocks and shares. Go to the bank into a savings account. If, God forbid, there is a fire in your house, everything is gone, including your life savings. It is not worth it. It is not worth it. I don't know about other countries, but in the UK, make sure you choose a bank that is registered with the Financial Services Authority so that if the bank goes bust, £85,000 is safe. You get that back. I'm sure other countries have similar schemes because it is good to save. It is great to save. I do feel good when I save. I feel like a little sense of achievement. I feel proud because I'm earning enough to be able to put a little bit aside. I feel proud because that money's not having to go to debt repayments. I feel proud that I'm working towards something I really want. What I need to make sure, and researching this episode has made me a bit more aware of it, I need to make sure that if I do one day save up enough money for a deposit on a house, I need to make sure that I will use those savings for that, because I hadn't really considered before that it might get to that and I will think, oh, it's more important for me to hold on to the money. And yet I can actually understand that fear. Even though that is the goal for my savings, it would feel quite scary to then empty that account. And this new stuff I've learned, I feel really glad I've learnt it because I can keep an eye on that now. I can give that some thought and explore it a bit because I don't want to save up for years only to be too scared to use the money for the goal that's been there all along. It's also made me consider whether I should try one of those limited access savings accounts. I'm not going to put anything so that I can't access it for 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, but maybe I can do 6 months. The fact that it feels so scary to not be able to access it tells me that that's something I need to look at in myself. I need to do a bit of work on, because for people who do have tendency towards hoarding money as well as stuff, seeing those numbers go up is understandably not just gratifying, but also calming and reassuring. You might think, I'm safe and secure because that money is there and I can get to it and it's mine. But if that feeling takes over and means that you don't use the money even when you need to because you feel too guilty or you feel too much fear, that really limits your life. It can limit your life at home if you don't put the heating on. It can limit your health if you're not buying healthy food or any food or fresh food. It can limit your mental health if you're refusing to socialize with friends or if you're freezing cold with the lights off rather than pay power bills. And it can actually cost you money if you don't get that niggle in the car fixed. Then maybe it will take the entire car falling apart, by which point it will cost you hundreds and hundreds of pounds or thousands to fix, when actually getting the initial, what's that funny noise the engine's making, fixed in the first place might have cost £50. A lot of us can relate to not wanting to waste. That's a big driver for a lot of people who hoard. We don't want to throw things away because we don't want to waste them. And if that thinking is expanding into your money, again, there are levels, aren't there? You don't want to waste your money. Of course you don't want to waste your money. Those of us who tend more towards the spending side of things do need to tell ourselves to stop wasting money, and that's legitimate. But it's that balance. If you start to consider legitimate, reasonable expenses as waste, then that becomes a whole problem of its own. And the thing with money hoarding is it's usually less obvious, because assuming you don't have piles and piles and piles and piles of notes and coins around your house, there isn't that visible clutter that is a giveaway. People don't get it. And unlike people who hoard stuff, if you're hoarding money, people think that's impressive. They think, gosh, you've saved all that. That's really good. You're not even on a big salary. Well done. It's seen as a positive. It's seen as something admirable. But the lack of difficulty getting around your house and the lack of social disapproval might reinforce the kind of unreasonable beliefs that you've got about why what you're doing is good. The same way a lot of hoarders will say, no, what I'm doing is good because I'm keeping things out of landfill. I think that could arguably be even worse if you're hoarding money. But if you're in that situation, nothing is enough. Nothing would be enough. You might think, once I've got, I don't know, £100,000 in the bank, I'll relax and I will spend a bit. But actually, when you've got £100,000 in the bank, you might go, oh, but wouldn't 110 be amazing? Or, translate that to millions, or translate it to 5,000 or 500. It's the thought processes and the principles rather than the actual amount probably doesn't matter much at all. But essentially, like with hoarding stuff, either overspending or oversaving is a sign that other things are wrong. The problem isn't the number in the bank balance, although that can become a problem of its own to add to your existing stress. But the problem isn't the number. The problem isn't that you haven't saved enough. The problem is something underlying, and it's manifesting as anxiety or fear or control over money. If you are genuinely not living in poverty, and yet you feel a desperate need to hold on to every penny, I think part of the job is about reassuring yourself that you are okay financially. You're not going to go broke. You have enough. If you lost your job tomorrow, you have enough to live on for 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. You could pay your rent for 3 months without having to worry. Try and reassure yourself in that way. As I mentioned earlier, a financial advisor can be great for really kind of not just giving you advice on investments, but also like putting all the numbers into a magic spreadsheet and telling you honestly and impartially whether you are okay financially or not. They will be able to say, well, based on your outgoings and based on the amount you've got saved, you can safely live for 6 years if all of your income disappeared overnight, for instance. They might be able to give you that kind of reality check that will enable you to relax your grip on it just a little bit. Just take a little bit of control and try and balance things a bit more realistically, a bit less punitively. And if, on the other hand, you're spending and spending and spending more than you have, the same applies. It's not about the spending, although the spending becomes its own issue. It's about something that's going on more deeply inside your soul. And you can't fix the spending without at least looking at what's going on and trying to understand it and trying to heal it a bit. I mean, this is immensely difficult stuff. But whether your problem is spending too much or saving too much, firstly, it's not just you. I know there are listeners nodding as they hear various bits throughout this episode, as they do every episode. It's really not just you. You're not the first person to have this problem, and you're not the worst person someone's ever seen with this problem. And secondly, it can be addressed. None of it is easy. It all involves hard work. It all involves tricky changes in the way you think, in the way you feel, in the way you process and address your thoughts and feelings and emotions and experiences. But even just with that bit more knowledge of overspending and oversaving that you've hopefully got from this episode, it's somewhere to start. In just 1 second, I'll give you my top tip of the week. In the meantime, please do subscribe to the podcast, review it, 5 stars would be amazing, and share it with your friends or anyone who might be interested or who might benefit from it. It all really helps. To find more ways to support the website, the podcast, and my overall de-hoarding project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support. Now, back to your top tip. So my top tip this week is a quote from no other than Nelson Mandela. And he said, "It always seems impossible until it is done." How true is that? And whatever challenges you're facing, keep reminding yourself of that. It does feel impossible, but we've all done impossible things. Now, just a reminder, if you want to become a de-hoarding darling, you can do so at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. You can find more online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. You can find me on Twitter at @thathoarder and on Facebook at Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to this podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes.
If there's one thing that my family and friends know me for, it's being an amazing gift giver. I owe it all to Celebrations Passport from 1-800-Flowers.com, my one-stop shopping site that has amazing gifts for every occasion. With Celebrations Passport, I get free shipping on thousands of amazing gifts. And the more gifts I give, the more perks and rewards I earn. To learn more and take your gift giving to the next level, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
When you make decisions for your company, you look for the no-brainers. If you have a lot of mailing to do, Stamps.com is the ultimate no-brainer. Use the Stamps.com mobile app to mail everything you need to keep your business running with up to 89% off USPS and UPS. Make the same no-brainer decision as over 1 million other businesses with Stamps.com. Use code PROGRAM for a special offer. That's Stamps.com, code PROGRAM.